Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Spending Window podcast. My name is Dan Wendell, and I am the co author of the recently released book called The Spending Window: How Intermittent Spending Can Improve Your Finances. To join me is going to be Angelo DeRosalia, my friend and co author, and we're going to start the show in a moment. Now, this show is going to be a little different than the last one. We're going to be talking a little bit more about why there is a need for this book. We're going to talk about spending habits in the United States and why we think the book is going to help people in this country and abroad improve their spending situation. So, to join me, let's get Angelo here. Welcome, Angelo. Welcome back to the second show we're doing. Are you excited?
Great to be here, Dan. Thanks. Very excited.
So, in the last show, we talked about how we started the book and why we wrote it, what the idea was. We talked about intermittent spending. We talked about how people are kind of mindless with their spending and how you and I came up with this idea on a whim years ago and finally got pen to paper. So, today I want to talk a little bit more about why there's a need for us to even be having this conversation and a need for creating spending windows and using intermittent spending.
Absolutely, Dan. No matter how old you are, no matter what phase of life, no matter what level of income, there is a certain spending pattern or habits that you have that you can certainly reflect upon and think about, and there's plenty of room for improvement. Looking forward to getting the message out there.
Well, in the beginning of the first chapter of the book, we talk about what's going on with spending in the United States. And I think it's fair to say that we have a spending problem from top to bottom. The government overspending, individuals overspending. And I think what people do is when they have money, they spend it. In fact, you might even say, and I think you have said to me before, people spend money whether or not they have it. People are spending on credit. People are spending money they don't even have. And that is a major problem.
Absolutely. We base our success financially as a society on the gross domestic product and how much is being spent and traded on a regular basis. As such, our society does a great job at providing credit and the ability to borrow, where whether or not you really have the ability to pay. Anyone who's ever gone to apply for a pre approval for a mortgage knows what it's like to be told, we'll approve you up to X amount of dollars. And the bank is always going to give you a little bit more money than you probably should or need to spend. So we certainly do a great job at spending, and it's something that you need to think about a little more.
And the government did try and come up with some regulations after the 2008 mortgage crisis and the meltdown of stock market, the overspending. And I think that's been better, but it's creeping back. And I'm finding more people are still spending more than they make. In fact, I've said in our first episode was I'd rather deal with a couple that has not a lot of money, but total control of their spending than a couple that has millions of dollars in the bank, but a complete lack of control. My job as a financial advisor is a lot easier when someone has control of their spending. And I think that could go across society. Life, financial life could be a whole lot easier if you could control your spending. And I think the problem we have as a nation isn't going to be solved by some sort of government regulation or reduction in what the banks can loan out. I think it starts within. I think people need to realize that they need to delay gratification. They need to change their behavior. And I think that's what we tried to get at in this book. Do you agree that there's just generally a lack of delayed gratification in our country?
Unquestionably, Dan. Um, I can kind of paraphrase or just give a brief overview of a study that was done many years ago in Stanford, California, where they looked at children and they put, let's say, a marshmallow in front of the child, and they say, if you wait a period of time before you take this marshmallow, we'll give you two marshmallows. And if you want to eat your marshmallow now, you can eat it now and just have one. And this period of time was very short, maybe a few minutes in duration. And it's amazing how many kids don't grasp the concept of if I wait a couple of minutes before I have this marshmallow, I can get two marshmallows or more marshmallows. And you may say, okay, well, that's children. Children don't really understand the concept of delayed gratification, nor can you expect them to. But as adults, I understand delayed gratification. But when you look at the marshmallow study and it's followed through years later, that's predictive of a certain number of metrics in the ability to save or succeed in life later is based on your ability to delay gratification, which is something that at an early age we have a difficult time doing. And you may think as an adult it's easier, your understanding is better, your self restraint's better. But at the same time, the pressures on you are more. You're responsible for more people. You may have more responsibilities in the workplace, at home, that make you feel the need to provide and provide right now. And that's part of the reason that we have spending issues like we do today.
And there's a lot of tactics and strategies that people could use to help delay their gratification, especially when it comes to saving for retirement, the 401k, automatic withdrawals, putting money aside automatically or out of sight, out of mind. But again, there's certain things that in this country we still do, and it's spend, spend, spend. Not only is there a lack of delayed gratification, but there's also a general acceptance of it. There's a general acceptance of overspending. We allow our government, you know, I made the comment during the stimulus plans of 2020 into 2021 how the government was spending more and more. And as a society, we have people for and against it. But for the most part, people are like, yeah, give me my check. And the thing is, the government is supposed to be a representative of our people. And I think it really is. The government overspends and everyone criticizes the government overspending. But if you look within, most people overspend. So the government is simply a reflection of our people. On top of just delayed gratification and lack thereof, there's a problem with society that people are also um, they are keeping up with the Joneses. So they spend a lot of their time and energy focused on, well, what are my neighbors doing? What should I be doing to signal that I'm successful? And there's this unbelievable amount of pressure, like you said, more people to provide for, but societal pressure to constantly be spending when the smart move financially may be to not spend at all.
Think about this for a moment. We everyone comes from different backgrounds and has certain unique personal scenarios. But I would think as a whole, probably our parents' generation didn't quote unquote need what we need today. And probably we won't need what our kids wind up needing later. Um, just think of how many cars people have, how many garages people have attached to their house, um, the quote unquote need to go on vacations. Um, and that's that's a hard thing to keep up with. Keeping up with the Joneses is real. We all face it at certain parts in our life from a very young age. It might be being in school and certain kids have certain toys or certain clothes, or they're going on certain trips or certain activities that you just feel like you need to partake in to keep up.
I wonder if it would be interesting if above, and this is not going to happen, and this is crazy to think, but imagine if instead of having a new car or a big house or whatever, you instead were able to keep up with the Joneses based on the amount of savings that they have. What percent, like above everyone's head, there was a percentage that said 20%. I'm saving 20% of my income. Oh, wow, they're keeping 20% of their income. Let's go for 21 and let's keep up with that. Instead of I have the latest vehicle, let me get that. Societal pressures are just really, really a big issue. But I think, and that might be something crazy. That's probably an episode of the Twilight Zone. But I think one thing that in the book we address, and I think this is where we try to get at, is people in general. are spending without necessarily thinking about it long term. In fact, I would argue that people spend without thinking at all. The default position for Americans is to spend. There's no let's look at how much money we have and then figure out what we're going to spend. It doesn't work that way. It's kind of the reverse. We just spend. We spend 24 hours a day. When we want something, we buy it. We worry about paying for it later. Credit on credit has really changed the way we do things. To address your earlier point about our parents, I don't think credit cards were as prominent, and certainly not 2 generations ago. There was no credit card. You had to go to the bank and talk to the banker, and you had to really think about things. There was no Amazon Prime getting something right away, ordering it and getting it that same day shipped to you. Amazing, amazing technology. And I think that this complete lack of control of spending really comes down to people have a lack of mindfulness about most things, but spending in particular.
We talked a little bit about mindfulness in our first episode, and a common theme you're going to hear on these episodes going further is the correlation between intermittency and eating and spending and other. It really boils down to gratification delay. Um, so there is a natural carryover between being mindful of how you spend, and then certain techniques have already been created in many other facets of life that can simply be applied to spending and will translate into success. Um, it's just a matter of first identifying the need, and you don't need to go out and create a blueprint and a plan. Mindfulness has been around for a long time, and the concept of using temporal or time based means to achieve gratification has already been out there, and translating it to spending is a fairly easy step. It's not too much of a stretch at all.
You're right. There's a lot of literature out there already on mindfulness, but there's also a lot of literature out there about spending in the form of budgeting. So creating budgets. Traditional budgeting, though, I feel as a financial professional, just doesn't work for most. Well, not maybe most, but for a lot of people. If you could do a traditional budget and you can create one and stick to it, then you've won. That's the victory, right? But for a lot of people, traditional budgeting doesn't work. And we touched upon this in the first episode how traditional budgeting is like counting calories in dieting. Whereas what we're suggesting, creating a spending window, intermittent spending, that's like intermittent fasting. And I think intermittent fasting is a lot easier for people instead of counting calories for a certain type of people because they just don't want to be bothered with the minutia. And that could be said about budgeting. Budgeting is a 4 letter word in this industry. People don't want to create budgets. And I think it's because they don't want to admit that they have to stick to it. It's really tough to stick to. But if you just say, if as an example, if I said to you, I want you to budget out what you're going to spend for the next week, you might freeze up and say, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. But if I said, I don't want you to spend any money between the hours of noon and 3 p.m. for the rest of the week, that's a lot easier to wrap the brain around. It's a lot less decisions to freeze up. It's just very simplistic. And the point of the book is what we're suggesting is doing that is not only a lot easier for some people, but it's a more effective way to changing your behavior, which is the ultimate goal of our book, to get people to change their spending behavior. Do you feel, Angelo, in your experience and working as a healthcare executive, seeing all sorts of people from coworkers and professionals all the way down to patients, do you feel like a traditional budgeting style of approaching a problem, counting specifically, works for a majority of the people? Or do you feel like I do that a traditional budgeting process is a little too much of a burden for many, especially in our fast paced and lack of delayed gratification society?
I think it works for a very short period of time. And it's not from bad intent that people become derailed. It's that budgets are great. There's certainly constraints. That's what they're designed to be, and it'll control your spending. But at the same time, it's often within your budget. You don't budget for what life is going to throw at you, and it could be health related, financial related, social related, relationships. Something's going to happen that you just don't anticipate. You didn't even conceive would happen. You say, why me? Why now? This doesn't happen to everybody else. Why is this happening? How is this happening? And it's the inability to think about those outside scenarios and plan for them that budgets get derailed. It's very easy to, let's go with the diet analogy again. You say, I'm going to have, this prescribed breakfast, this prescribed lunch, and this prescribed dinner all the time. What happens when you go on vacation? What happens when you're under stress? What happens when you have to work an extra shift and you're not going to be home to prepare a meal the way you thought? Those are all setups for how you're going to get derailed from your budget. What we're talking about here is a lifestyle change. And that lifestyle change will translate into a better financial health, which is going to mean overall happiness. There are many studies in the literature and in the mainstream and the media that talk about when you're able to declutter your life and simplify things, your happiness improves. Um, Minimalism is another form of life that's out there, another lifestyle that has been explored. And there's so many studies that show by reducing some of that background noise, reducing some of the confusion in your life will lead to more happiness for you. So when you can work on a window for your spending, the spending window, intermittent spending, you'll be amazed at how much your realization um, towards yourself, towards how others spend, and you'll transcend into a higher level of happiness. We guarantee it.
And that's the interesting part about what we're trying to do. We're not trying to tell people what they should buy. There's plenty of insight into whether you should buy a new car or buy a used car, whether you should rent a home or buy a home, whether you should spend money on fresh groceries or buy cheap pre-made meals, whatever it might be. That's not what the goal of the book is. And we're not here to tell people how to spend their money. We're trying to tell people to focus on when they spend their money because it's a lot easier to do. And yes, we're going to get into it. And I think talking on the next show, we should talk about our windows, what we think are some good windows, what your preferred window might be, and talk more specifically about the logistics of intermittent spending. But I want to end this show by suggesting to people to start thinking about spending. In other words, when's the last time that you actually thought about what you were spending your money on and said, well, let me think this through before I swipe the card or click the button or give the cash over? And I would think that if you do that, if you think right now, if you close your eyes and you say, when's the last time I really put thought into a purchase? It's going to probably be a major purchase like a vacation or a subscription or like to go to Disney or to buy a new car. It's going to be a big major purchase and you put some time and thought into it. But what if you took that same thought process and you just added it to all the purchases? I'm not talking about you're sitting online and you're going to buy a pack of gum at the register, you're going to think about it, but just taking the time to add that pause, to start thinking about purchasing. It's going to change your life. And I think that we have a lot more to offer our listeners. I'm looking forward to the next show. I think that people aren't used to this idea of spending windows. It's a new concept, but it's not something completely new. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're talking about mindfulness, we're talking about spending habits, combining the two, and we have a system that's fairly simple, not a lot of decisions to make. You're not going to get decision fatigue. You're just going to be creating something that basically disrupts your life. And that's the goal. We want to disrupt your life because for many people, the current trajectory is not one that's sustainable, not one that's enjoyable, and not one that's leading to financial success. So, but before we go, Ange, do you have anything last things to say about society, mindfulness, spending in general before we head out and close out our second episode?
Uh, we're a community here for you. I want you to visit us at www.spendingwindow.com. Leave your comments, subscribe to our channel, click like. You'll hear interesting, you'll be able to partake in interesting dialogue back and forth with others who share similar concerns. And we're going to lay out a roadmap for how you can implement this change into your life. It's not very difficult to do, and you'll see results immediately. This isn't something you're going to have to wait a year, 2 years, 10 years. You'll see results immediately. And your happiness is going to follow along with it.
Yeah, and that's the goal. We want people to start getting a little bit more mindful. So in the next episode, what we're going to talk about is what intermittent spending styles could be, what spending windows would look like, which ones are our favorites, which ones we've seen people use successfully, some and maybe even some pitfalls of what to avoid when creating a window. So stay tuned, and thanks, Angelo, for another great show. We'll be back for another episode of the Spending Window.
Thanks, Dan.